or more efficient or something like that. But yeah, certain languages that you speak are more difficult than others to put together. They're all sort of valid ways of communicating, and REST is the one that's taking over. HTTP is the one that most people sort of are still familiar with. And SOAP is yesterday's technology. It's still around, but all three are valid. And that's what the controller's got to do. You'll either have a controller that understands things like this HTTP format. That sort of type of controller will be your Tomcat type one. That's agreeing that things are coming in using a specific format. And you just use things like inside your controller, you say things like get parameter name or get the parameter for format. And all that is built within the servlet API. There's a library supplied to you that automatically gets added to dynamic web projects that does that for you. But in a similar way, there's libraries available to decrypt the SOAP coming in, or to decrypt the REST coming in. That's like the Jersey API that we sort of had a look at. There's all ways of creating your own controller. Now that controller, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter what language is coming in, so long as you've got a controller for it that can understand this request and turn that request into something that can interact with the model. So we can change what that controller format is from a standard HTTP to a RESTful one and not change the model. So this is the idea of the MVC, is that we can change a lot of the individual components and not bother about what the back end looks like. So when you move over from an HTTP interface to a RESTful one, you can keep these. You can keep the ways in which it does it. If you move it out, if you move this model out to the cloud, you can keep your existing controller. It's just a section that you're changing is the only section that you need. And that's why in this sort of assignment you're asked to yes, have something that does a simple URL HTTP web service and can hopefully sort of format it, a bit more on that in a second. That's the basics to it, and that's really what you're given as starter files in that Ajax data one as a starter point for it. But then let's change the data side to it. Let's change the model, or let's change the controller. This WSDL and the RESTful one to sort of get in there. So I'm expecting really sort of one project for each one. You wouldn't have a project, you wouldn't have a controller that did all three to it. It might be nice if we could have somebody here who understood multiple languages and could translate them all as they sort of came in. It's just not realistic for how these are actually implemented. So you probably have one project for each one, where you could copy the code over, copy that sort of data access object over from one to the sort of other one.
So just to confirm on that, is that essentially like one project for JSON, one project
No.
for that?
No, that's one project for a RESTful interface.
Oh right, yes.
One project for an HTTP one, and probably a separate one for the App Engine one where you're storing it remotely like that. Yeah. Now what these things are doing here, that yes, this controller is getting this data and it's getting back that film object, but it doesn't necessarily. All it's done is got that film object. It's got that raw data. Now it could at that point send it back. It could send it back to the client. Now you can't. Well, you could try and send back. It's got at the moment in here. It's got say a film binary object. You couldn't have back one of those Java representations of it. It's sort of got your Java object for it, or a list of Java ones. You could send that back to the client. It's not going to be. They're not going to be that impressed by receiving a raw Java object unless they happen to be Java. If it happens to be a Java client, and you say incoming Java object, then yeah, it could deal with it. But the thing is, between this web service side and the outside world, that's going over the internet. One side has no idea what the other side's doing. You're supposed to be sending these things back in a more universal format, not presuming that your client is a Java program. And in fact, if we're running this thing in the browser, it's not going to be a Java program, it's going to be JavaScript that's requesting it. So you've got to format your result in a way that the outside world could understand. So that's why once your controller's got the data, you can then just say, okay, my work's done. I will just pass this raw data, this film or films data, out to a viewer object that will just translate it into the required format, back to the what the outside world wants. So it takes the raw data, formats it into JSON, XML, text, or even HTML, if you like, or whatever format the client's expecting it in. Because the client app, if this is in a browser, it could take the browser could just take the HTML. Your viewer could format it in HTML and receive it in that. Trouble is, if it's in HTML, it's in a fixed format, and your client has to accept whatever the viewer says in terms of the layout of it. Whereas if you send it back in XML or JSON, you can let your client app decide how to arrange that data. When it comes in, I've got some XML, okay, well, which parts do I need, where do I want to put them? You get much more flexibility. And that's the idea with a web service. It's not communicating with the actual person, if you like, sat in front of a browser. It's communicating with the JavaScript behind it and sending just the raw data and let the JavaScript decide how to lay that data out. So that means that the result going back, yes, if you send the result back in XML, it displays the results when they're returned by taking that JSON and deciding what to do with it, or taking that XML. But it's also up to this client app to decide who it's talking to and what sort of format that request is. So you've got here something like a films form that they're filling in. So you might just, even at its simple level, ask them to fill in a name. Okay, they fill in a name. This client application has got to make a request in one of these formats. Now, by default, a browser will create this server HTTP format. If you want it to create a RESTful one, it doesn't do that automatically. You know, when you have a form and you have an OK button on it, if you just had a standard form, when you click on OK, it generates that HTTP response with all the name value pairs off the sort of screen. If you want to do something different to that, then you've got to do it manually in the background through your JavaScript. So if you want to add some extra parameters on, like a formatting parameter, or change the structure of the request altogether, you're going to have to do that in JavaScript. So your client app can be a web-based app, can be a standalone one, but it's got to form that request in whatever format the controller's expecting. So it might be sending a REST one, it might be sending a standard HTTP one, it might be sending a SOAP one. It's up to the client to take that data that it's got on the form and create that request to make it over to the other side. And then when the result comes back, XML, JSON, whatever, to display that. Now that's what you were doing in all your Ajax type stuff and do jQuery. So that's where your Ajax jQuery labs will help in that one to do it. The overall structure is helped by this Ajax data application. Just to show you how it's tied together. sure I've still got file Ajax data in. Let me just quickly import it, then I can show you. Bring in. Programming. Now you'll see in Ajax data, I'll clear all these out. Apologies to somebody if your code is on display there, because you're working on this machine a bit. Just as a, for example, in the Ajax data one, you'll see something called show cities. This is an example of the controller that's